Evening. You're bringing in the crowd, which is wonderful. So I'm delighted to introduce Vicki Callahan, who's our visiting Fulbright scholar from the University of Southern California, and her school there is Cinematic Arts. And Vicki's areas of interest are digital praxis, film and media history and theory, gender studies, transmedia, and new scholarly and storytelling tools. So very much suited to, I think, the work that's been going on here today. And just to flag that Vicki's going to be with us until Christmas, and she's doing 2 workshops, one on the 18th of September on digital media principles, tools and strategies, and then in October she's doing another one on transmedia, which is a 2-day workshop. So if anybody's interested in those, talk to Máire in the graduate school, in CACSSS graduate school.
The transmedia one's going to be great. Sarah Atkinson, so I mentioned Sarah, she's going to be here, as well as Alison Norrington, who's a professional, how can I say, storyteller for transmedia.
Fantastic. Okay. So just to mention some of the work that Vicki's been doing, she's recently been an editor of a book called Reclaiming the Archive, Feminism and Film History, and is working on another edited collection called Future Texts, Subversive Performance and Feminist Studies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And again, thanks so much for being here at 5 o'clock on Friday. It is Friday, right? Yeah, okay, good. All right. And I'm going to be using a PC here, so if I look a little awkward, that's what that is, because I'm normally a Mac person. But I wanted the stuff to play fairly readily, and I also wanted to be able to connect to, I'm going to show you quite a few websites of material, so I wanted to be able to do that with some facility, and I thought we might speed that up if I work from here. So let's just start here. So I'm going to start by telling you what I'm not going to talk about. Maybe this will be appalling or of relief. First off, I'm not going to talk about skillful digital activism. It's not a utopia. I'm not interested in looking through the lens of utopianism and the shiny, bright object of technology as essentially democratic. That's part of the kind of rhetoric around digital activism sometime. I picked here this lovely piece by the artist, feminist artist Leslie Thornton as my kind of backdrop for a utopian, because I think it's not necessarily utopian, but it is a very positive image of the digital, because I think these are some of the qualities we might want to keep in mind here today of her installation. It's a Times Square installation by Leslie Thornton. And what she has is photographs of nature that she then digitizes and turns them into kaleidoscopes, the same footage, and then she digitally projected them in Times Square. She was really trying to think about that relationship between art, technology, the human, urban centers, etc. So that experimentation with the digital to alter perspective is one of those things that are positive that I'd like to talk about today, but not necessarily essential to the digital. Also displacement of the work in public space, intervening in a commercial boulevard with creative expression, that's also a very important component too that we want to be thinking about. That doesn't necessarily happen, not essential to the digital, engaging diverse groups, provoking dialogue. All those are great components of the digital, but not necessarily essential. I'm also not going to talk about how awful the digital is, but we should be mindful of this image's reality. This is the National Security Agency, 1.7 billion American electronic records and communications a day are uploaded, swept up by the United States government of citizens' everyday communication. The global consolidation of surveillance and state and corporate power through our digital devices is enough to give us pause. But again, it's not inherently, essentially, the digital, not inherently or essentially dystopian. So, but it's there. So we want to keep that in mind. We also want to keep in mind the dangers of collectivism and slacktivism. That comes from, these are some kind of, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we should definitely be thinking about this as we think of all these different examples. Michael White has several essays on collectivism that critique the notion that an activist campaign can take on the strategies of advertising and market research as the core to their methods, and we're going to see some examples here. So that what that means is you have an emphasis on scale and accounting of how many clicks you get, as that becomes a way of monitoring how successful that you are. That becomes, as Mike White notes, that becomes very much to the detriment of local organizations and to philosophical commitment. It produces shallow commitment and ultimately political cynicism and passivism, White argues. Malcolm Gladwell also has a very well-known article, The Small Change, Why the Revolution Will Not Be Tweeted. And what he's thinking about there is that real social change comes from on the ground, face-to-face, hierarchical organizations. He says, and he uses this example, is the civil rights movement. And he says, that was all personal relationships. And so the world of the internet is not about hierarchy, rather it's about distributed networking. So he goes, that's not the best way. So, oops, sorry. Let me go back to this one more time. One of the best examples of collectivism, also here, is the Coney 2012 example, the Invisible Children campaign to bring justice to the warlord Joseph Kony. The campaign was known for its scale. They had something like 40 million viewers. Its prosperity, it raised incredible sums of money, but also its spectacular failure. Much of the material in the documentary was untrue, unfortunate, sensationalized. Much of the money went to the growing the organization. And lastly, the campaign did not result in Joseph Kony's arrest. So outside that, it was fine. So then what is skillful digital activism? That's what I want to talk about today. So there's some key elements. You should have a robust media ecology. That means you have a very, notion of a mixed media environment that's connected, it's generative, it produces sharing and connections and more sharing. So that's when we talk about a media ecology, a rich media ecology, that's what we're talking about. It should employ social media tools for connecting and sharing. And what I mean by social media, and I'm sure most of you know what this means, but just to be clear, it's tools for connecting. So tools for connecting, sharing, and changing, altering, right? So you send something to someone, Twitter, and they can add to it. They can add another picture to it. They can take a picture, they can remix it, and then they can send it out again. So Facebook, so Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, any of the Google Toolbox websites, those are all under that category with social media. So when I talk about social media, that's really that kind of category that I'm talking about. Some of those are owned by big companies, but they're not commercial generally. Then there's also transmedia, which is different. It's a cross-platform strategy. It may be print, it may be live performance. So cross-platform means more than one, right? So it can be print and live performance, it can be live performance audio, it can be video online. It may or may not include social media. Often it does. So just when I say transmedia, I may not be meaning social media. So I'll try to be very specific about what people are using as we go along. So we also have another key component is co-creators. That's the people formerly known as the audience, right? Authorship boundaries will vary in this context, and the amount of co-creation will vary also. So what I want to do is, the way I want to approach this, I'm going to be really giving you, my hope is not too glossy overview, but I really want to show you the range of possibilities for digital media activism. And I want to think about this phrase also that Sasha Costanza-Chopp in his book Out of the Shadows and Into the Streets uses, by any media necessary. That's what's successful. That's what makes a successful digital campaign. You're not hung up on, I have to use Facebook, I have to use Twitter. I'm going to use what my community uses. I'm going to use what my community communicates with, right? So that's the very key concept that we'll be looking at and some campaigns will do it better than others, and we'll kind of take a look at that too. But I want to kind of, as a way to break this up, because there's so many different ways to be thinking about this, I want to look at objectives and goals of the campaigns, and then I want to look at their strategies, right? So the kind of key goals here, kind of philosophies and goals. Oh, I want to raise awareness. I want to change. I want to create a dialogue. I want to preserve something. I want to archive a lost community or a community that's needs to have their history preserved. I want it to be participatory. That's actually a philosophical approach. You think you might get you might use strategy, but it's actually a philosophical approach because it's about where you start and it's about who is engaged and also organized. And then we'll look at a range of strategies here as well. So these methods and strategies can happen anywhere along these lines. We'll also talk a little bit about outcomes. Some of these are things still ongoing, and the outcomes kind of are variable. And so I'll talk about it a little bit. And some I kind of know the projects firsthand, so I can talk a little bit about behind the scenes stuff too. Okay, so first, this is the kind of, how many people have seen Food Inc? No? Oh, my goodness. Food Inc. is a kind of a great example of what I call broadcast transmedia. It has a documentary film, a book, a website. It has about a dozen NGOs, associates, including Oxfam, the Humane Society, Food Water Watch, etc., in their Take Part section. I'm going to just pop up to this here and you can take a look. Oops, sorry. Oh, here we go. Going back to it now. So you can see here, and that's why I said I wanted to be able to take a look at this different components of the website. So this is the Take Part element of the campaign. And it has like, there are different, so these are the different NGOs they're working with. This is how you take action, how you can help change our food system, etc. But you'll notice there's not a whole lot about, even though they are partnered with a lot of organizations, there's not a lot of local stuff there. It's like, oh, go to the Humane Society, or go to eatwell.org. It's very, very much broadcast, like from one to many, right? And Take Part is part of participant media, which participant media is, I'll come back and talk about them a little bit in a second, but they're a very big for-profit, social good production house. A lot of the stuff they do is, I'll give some examples here in a second, but they also just do distribution for documentary films. So, but Take Part is a division within participant media that functions as an online resource for outreach. They have a lot of petitions for changes around topics too. There's also an effort to link between topics and different films that they put out. It's a great example of transmedia, but it's also a great example of broadcast. They're very high-end, very well-made, as you'll see in 1 second. Here we go. I'll show you a trailer for Food Inc.
The way we eat has changed more in the last 50 years than in the previous 10,000. The modern supermarket has on average 47,000 products. The industry doesn't want you to know the truth about what you're eating, because if you knew, you might not want to eat it. We've never had food companies this powerful in our history.
Everything we've done in modern agriculture is to grow it faster, fatter, bigger, cheaper.
If you can grow a chicken in 49 days, why would you want one you got to grow in 3 months?
When you go through the supermarket, there is an illusion of diversity. So much of our industrial food turns out to be rearrangements of corn.
Sometimes you look at a vegetable and say, okay, well, we can get 2 hamburgers for the same price.
They have managed to make it against the law to criticize their products. There is an effort to make it illegal to publish a photo of any industrial food operation.
I find it incredible that the FDA wants to allow the sale of meat from cloned animals without any labeling.
Peanut butter contaminated with salmonella.
E. coli.
Okay, so you get the kind of this very, high production quality, very fast-paced, very well-edited a very kind of strong organization. And also, I don't know why, there's something kind of weird going on with the clip is just a little bit out of sync, but somewhere in the transfer from one world to the next, they got out of sync. The other thing that they do, and this is on Take Part, and hopefully this is not out of sync, is they tend to, participant media will use a lot of celebrities. And again, this broadcast one-to-many often does that. It kind of bridge character to help us be brought into the story. So here's a kind of a great example of a bridge character.
Maltodextrin, lactylate, monosodium.
Monosodium glutamate.
Imagine there was something we simply could not live without.
Something so important that we were programmed to want it every single day. Something that powers us. Something that makes us grow. Something without which
We would die.
And what if this thing was a complete mystery to us?
What if we really didn't know where it came from or how it was made?
I am talking about FOOD. Food.
Food. It took a... Wait.
Not even sure how to pronounce that.
Am I look like a chemist?
I don't know what half of these things are.
Let's start eating smart. Learn how our food is made. Make a habit of reading food labels.
Learn about food safety. If we are what we eat, let's find out what we're eating. To learn more, visit takepart.com/foodinc.
Carbonate Mike. If you can't read it, you shouldn't eat it.
See, we have a lot of problems with big words in my country, so we have celebrities, tell us to avoid them, right? But you can see that again, it's very much information for us, kind of telling us, okay, don't eat this, don't do that. It's kind of one-to-many out there, and that one looks like it's synced up, so maybe fingers crossed that helps. So participant media, this is the breadth of things that they do. They were the distributor for Citizen4. They were not the original funding behind Citizen4, but they also made the help, right? So they're in this weird zone of not just documentary, but also kind of biopics, Lincoln, and also kind of quasi-historical, right, with the help, or Good Night and Good Luck, kind of fictional, historical fiction, or fictional representations of history as in the help. So they really have this breadth of material. And again, some of them, they're only doing the distribution. So they're getting some Citizen4, credit when they were just the distributors. But hey, that's something. Okay, so next. So that's sort of awareness, transmedia, very kind of glossy. We also have awareness as interactive. And let me show you just a little bit of this clip. This is a project, a documentary by Particam Films. If you know them, they're a non-profit documentary film group. That's all they make is documentaries. They're not making fictional films, and they're non-profit. So they're very different from participant media. They do tend to have transmedia websites, often affiliated with their work. This is a film that looks at the group Ceasefire in Chicago, and especially Amina Matthews' work to stop gang violence. So I'll show just a little bit of this.
I need everybody from the ages of 13 to 24 to stand up. I'm going to be real honest with you all, because see, we real talking up in here, because Duke is real laying right in front of us.
A man was murdered overnight on Chicago's South Side. Police say it happened execution style.
I'm fed up.
124 people have been killed.
Each and every one of you all can be Duke right here.
There are 3 bullet wounds on the flyer, but
We got a responsibility to bring up our community to be vibrant.
He died last Friday, shot in the back.
My brothers, cease the fight and call the truth.
The violent weapons have one goal in mind: save a life. And we need people to step up this table and go over and beyond.
And we got over 500 years of prison time at this table. That's a lot of wisdom.
That's my life if I was in prison. That's why I do what I do now. I think I just stay busy, just trying to forget about some of the things that I've done.
I used to be in jails, kicking off riots, and it's just gangbanging.
Let's just collect this. Let's just be a family.
It's always tomorrow.
Alina Matthews' father was one of the biggest gang leaders in the history of Chicago. She gets in, but a lot of guys can't get in.
Schools, churches, your mama's house, your cars, those are safe zones.
Hang in there, baby. Sooner or later, I'll get it.
How can you help me?
Okay, there are no celebrities endorsing this film or helping you understand gang violence, right? It's a very different kind of feel and tone to the piece. Let's take a look just a little bit at the Interrupters website. As you can see, there's this area, Go Beyond the Film, which has a interactive component here, so I can get to it.
Right, sir. How can you help me?
Yeah, here we go. I want to go to the Go Beyond the Film, and we'll, in hopes, did it go? No, we went beyond the film to the next slide. Hang on. Oops. Alright, so we can go to the, looks like it's not wanting to do this. Well, let me just tell you about this really quickly so we don't lose too much time. It has a interactive component to an interactive exploration. And in that interactive exploration, if you go to the website, and I have all the links on this, and I'll post the slides afterwards, and you can go check a lot of these websites out. In that Go Beyond section to the main website, it takes you to an interactive website with scrolling context. It gives you a kind of a history of the gang violence and the context behind it, the situation behind it. It has embedded videos. It has shrines to people who have been killed by gang violence that have been posted by their friends. There's discussion, Twitter streams. There's also with an outreach area. This film was originally about Chicago gang violence, and now the outreach component also goes to other areas in the United States too. So it's a pretty interesting example of trying to move beyond these broadcast elements to more an interactive engagement by communities. So I want to also show you here too the kind of next step in awareness is immersive virtual reality. It's the kind of last example I'm going to show you of awareness. Well, in some ways, all of the projects are about awareness, but very explicitly targeting awareness. And here I would say the awareness is not only informational, but really emotional and embodied. This is the work of Leane de la Peña. She's actually one of my colleagues at USC. She's a doctoral candidate in media arts and practice, which is the division that I'm in. I had the good fortune actually to work with her in a class closely last semester also. So this is some of her work, Project Syria, which she's has just completed, and Hunger in LA was 2012. And I'll let her, it'd be best just to let her talk about this, give you a better sense of how this works.
When I started these pieces, and I got so much grief and so much pushback for what I was doing, that, I was an advocate, I wasn't a journalist, that these virtual reality things were games. And I used to take that criticism extremely seriously, but it didn't stop me. My name is Leane de la Peña, and I'm a pioneer in how we can use virtual reality to tell nonfiction narratives. Virtual reality has had its sort of fits and spurts and starts. The first big boom of VR was in the 90s, and when it didn't really materialize in a way that could be commercialized and really go out to the public, people really disparaged the kind of investment that went into it. But that doesn't mean that people didn't stay working away at it. Now with Facebook buying Oculus Rift for $2 billion, I would say that the validation for virtual reality as a technology has come full circle. So in 2012, my piece Hunger in Los Angeles premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. How many of us know about how hungry people have gone in America and how overstrained the food banks are? We've read that over and over again. But then you put them on scene in a food bank line when they see this man collapse and chaos breaks out. I use real audio from the real events. You really can hear how that event unfolded and what the experience was like for people who were there. In order to do the body capture and make sure that we could reproduce our witness exactly as she really was, we use a light stage. And the light stage means that we can capture somebody in a 360-degree way and make sure we get every natural nuance of their physical presence. So the virtual reality goggles actually have like a tracking system with these bright cherry red lights that the cameras can read, and they know exactly where you're looking in space. And that is what's key to making you feel comfortable. Despite the fact that the graphics seem limited, or that we don't actually yet have completely photoreal characters and environments, it's amazing how experiencing through your body allows you to suspend any questions and you actually feel like it's real. Klaus Schwab, who's the head of the World Economic Forum, came through my lab at USC and did hunger. He took off the goggles and turned to me and said, "Can you build me something on Syria?" It is another very powerful story, again using material that was captured on scene. It's a two-part piece that puts you in a corner in Aleppo when a mortar shell hits, a young girl singing, and you really can hear the pain and the chaos of the ensuing event.
So you can see that she begins with this original piece of footage that she then transfers through using animation and still using that original sound, but then using animation, and then the person walks through the space of that reproduced space through animation. Sorry, I have this out of sync thing. It's that transfer from my Mac to PC. It's not liking it so much. So I'll just have to be able to just show a few of the clips, I guess. All right, so let's talk about, so that's interactive. So that's still kind of awareness, and she's really interested in emotional awareness in her case. Now let's think about another philosophy or another kind of objective, which is to say dialogue. This is a really great case, Helen D. Michel's Lunch and Love Community. It's a transmedia project on the Berkeley Lunch School program, which was an effort to include healthy food in lunches and awareness in students about food choices and even students growing their own food. The project uses short videos, a website of resources, writings by the filmmaker, and live events called media socials. This was a really key component to what she was doing. She really wanted, Helen really, I've been talking with her since the beginning of this project in 2010. She really wanted to flip the notion of what a documentary would be. It should not just be an advocacy. There's advocacy behind this, but she didn't feel like it should be advocacy only and telling people what they should be thinking about. What she wanted was more something that generated a conversation and generated a dialogue. And so she'd have these live events where she would invite people from different points of view, and she would show these short clips along with the along with these speakers, and oftentimes like fights would break out. And then she was like, "Wow, that was kind of unexpected," but it was also this kind of question about having dialogue and conversation versus just one point of view. And also it was very much telling her about letting go as a filmmaker, right? She came from this background of experimental art practice and experimental documentary, and suddenly she had to really change her kind of perspective on all of this. What's interesting about this project, it's still going on now. It started out, she wanted to make a documentary film, and this 2010 period was right around the time documentary film started to collapse. There was just like no funding for it, and one of the ways it began to get funding again was through these transmedia campaigns. These short films that were online, that used social media, that got a conversation going. Then there was all kinds of funding around transmedia projects. So she turned her long-form film into a transmedia short-form film project. It was so successful, she now has a distribution deal to go make a long-form film on this topic. So that's a kind of, and as you can see now, since 2010, documentary has exploded. And I think one of the reasons it's exploded has been because of the use of transmedia to get people engaged and to use social media to really create a community and to create dialogue, really in some ways free advertising for for films. I'm just going to let you look at the website and and I'll just leave the clip for now because I have a lot of different examples here. This is another this is a different example of dialogue. It's a personal documentary. Let me see if I can put it up. It's really short, so let's, fingers crossed it'll work. Let me just set it up just a little bit for you. This is a film, I worked on the outreach strategy on this film, and it's before she was just shooting the film, MT Sylvia, and she was just trying to say, hey, how do I even get my head around this kind of notion of transmedia? She wanted to make a personal documentary, which was about her mother being an atomic scientist that worked on the atomic bomb. So she basically and had been very involved herself, MT, in the peace movement. So she wanted to have this kind of dialogue going with her mother about how could you do this, right? And then it turned into this kind of parallel story of what also happened in Japan. So she has kind of two parts to the film. Part of it's in Japan about how, so the atomic mom there is also a peace activist in Japan as well. So I'm going to play, hopefully this will work.
This is Virtual Mom. Did you know that your chances of surviving an atom bomb attack are excellent? It's true.
This is basic civil defense information from the Department of Defense, Office of Civil Defense, Washington. If you're caught in the open and there's a brilliant nuclear flash in the distance, take cover immediately.
I knew that my mother had worked on the atom bomb. As a child, that's what we called her.
You used that phrase that I worked on the atomic bomb, and it sounds like I built it. It rankles me.
I knew she was just a teenager when they built the first bomb, but I was intrigued that she was involved years later. But it was top secret, and she couldn't talk about it. I knew nothing about it. I always, as a child, envisioned that she was in some James Bond movie, kind of spy, espionage thing, and it was very compelling to me, and I just thought that she was so cool. My friends' moms were, making Rice Krispie treats, but my mom, she was doing secret government work with the atom bomb. She brought this big box of her Navy file. Because of my interest, she decided to share it with me.
We had to do lab studies. X number of mice would be irradiated with X amount of X-rays. And what we found out was that one of the signs of radiation illness would be diminished spleen. I started thinking about what did they do with the information in terms of exposing human beings. But I never did anything about it. I just processed it internally, I guess. There was no one to discuss it with anyway.
Okay, so again, this film started out like it was going to be a traditional documentary. And then she built these, and part of this was through the conversation that we had with her when she was first starting out, and then also her own ideas and other people she worked with as well, to have these momisodes, which would have people interviewing their mothers on their notions of war and peace also, and then they would send them to her and she would upload those to YouTube. So it started out as a kind of a traditional film, and then it really became about dialogue. She's taken this film throughout the U.S. to different film festivals as well as to Japan. The impact there has been much more kind of remarkable in Japan, where people really became a kind of discussion on reconciliation, whereas in the U.S. they're still kind of was not as positive. She often had very hostile people in her audience saying, why are you defending the Japanese, etc. So she had but that notion of dialogue, and again, a kind of media social, as she was showing her films throughout. So that's a dialogue. Okay, so archives now. I want to do a section on archives. This is an example of archive that's a very kind of tabletop archive. And so the basic goal is archive, and the strategy is through interaction. This is from, and you can take a look at this on Ayoka Chinzira. She's a filmmaker, digital artist, animator. And this was a tabletop where you could create a quilt using, through touchtop, using materials, whether that was video or images of Katrina survivors, witnesses. So materials that was submitted by them, and then people would organize this to create a quilt about the experience. This is probably one of my all-time favorite. I hope this works quickly to go over to the site. This is probably one of my all-time favorite examples. This archive existed first as an only online archive and a collaborative project of the Remember the Triangle Fire Coalition and Buscata, which is a group that works on public art projects. It's a site that depends on community contributions of artifacts in remembrance of the 1911 New York City fire at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory that killed 146 workers. Many of the workers were young immigrant workers who'd been dealing with anti-union bosses and unsafe working conditions. The fire was a tremendous organizing moment in U.S. labor history and a key factor in U.S. fire safety laws. The site asks for contributions from just the general public. Please upload to our site, from the personal to the political, about this specific historical event. Let me just read just a tiny bit of their call for contributions. Remember, because we're still fighting for social justice for all, so they're making that connection from the 1911 case of workers and immigrants to today. We're seeking contributions that connect you to this event, a personal story, a legislation passed in response to the fire, pictures, documents from current struggles for justice, cultural responses to the fire, everyday objects influenced by legislation and struggle. We encourage you to make your contributions personal to reflect why you're passionate about remembering the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. With the power of communal testimony, no one has the responsibility for every perspective, but together we can create an entwined whole. So it also now has, it started out with just an online of these artifacts, and now it has an open museum that Buscata helped them organize, and they're kind of like these pop-up installations in different museums around these artifacts. So in this example is of a woman who died in the fire, right? This is, her picture lives on in my living room, as you can see. And then this one is, this is something that someone created as a memento for one of the people that died in the fire. And they created that 2 years ago, and again, of a kind of remembrance of this event. So anyway, she found out that this, so she wears this in the name and honor of her every year on the date of the fire. So let's see if we can just, and you can see there's comments on this too. Let me just see if I can pop into the site really quickly. So you see they have things around memorials, and that's, in this case, it's a memorial. They have cultural responses, various individuals, and you're asked to upload in these different categories. Some of them have responses, some don't. So you can see here's some comments on that as well. Okay, that's probably one of my, like, really, I lost my place. Okay, here we are. Okay, good. All right, here's another archives co-creation. This is from StoryPort. This is another kind of amazing project. StoryPort is an oral history project that works by having two individuals sit down in dialogue. A lot of times they're family members. They can be interviewed with someone outside the family, though. Also, it began in 2003 in a story booth they put in Grand Central Station in New York City. And people would go in to conduct a conversation interview just to get their kind of personal story, or also to even as a way to honor them, also to get that story on board. The project was developed by David Isay, who had been working in radio, and he said he wanted to turn radio documentary on its head. That having interviews not to entertain, right? Not to entertain or to give information primarily, but the interview itself was the objective, right? And by that he meant to say that their lives, their stories were important. And so the whole purpose of the actual interview is to validate that voice and that experience. They have facilitators in the booth that help them tell the stories or to give them a kind of framework for telling the stories. They're very powerful stories. Some are quite touching in their expression of everyday humanity. This is a story of Oshia Israel and Mary Johnson Roy. It's an incredible story of forgiveness and reconciliation as Israel, as a young teen, killed Johnson Roy's son. I'll just let you play. I'll just play it from there. And you can.
Wanted to go.
Oops, here we go.
You and I met at Stillwater Prison. I wanted to know if you were in the same mindset of what I remember from court, where I wanted to go over and hurt you, but you were not that 16-year-old. You were a grown man. I shared with you about my son.
And he became human to me. You know, when I met you, it was like, okay, this guy is real. And then when it was time to go, you broke down and started shedding tears, and the initial thing to do was just try to hold you up as best I can. Just hug you like I would my own mother.
After you left the room, I began to say, I just hugged the man that murdered my son. And I instantly knew that all that anger and animosity, all the stuff I had in my heart for 12 years for you, I knew it was over. That I had totally forgiven you.
As far as receiving forgiveness from you, sometimes I still don't know how to take it because I haven't totally forgiven myself yet. It's something that I'm learning from you.
I treat you as I would treat my son, and our relationship is beyond belief. We live next door to one another.
Yeah, so you can see what I'm doing, you know, firsthand. Mm-hmm. We actually bump into each other all the time, leaving in and out of the house. And, you know, our conversations, they come from, boy, how come you ain't called over here to check on me in a couple of days? You ain't even asked me if I need my garbage to go out.
Uh-huh.
I find those things funny because it's a relationship with a mother for real.
Well, my natural son is no longer here. I didn't see him graduate. Now you're going to college. I'll have the opportunity to see you graduate. I didn't see him get married. Hopefully one day I'll be able to experience that with you.
And just to hear you say those things and to be in my life in the manner in which you are, it's my motivation. It motivates me to make sure that I stay on the right path. You still believe in me. And the fact that you can do it despite how much pain I cause you, it's amazing.
I know it's not an easy thing, you know, to be able to share our story together. So I admire that you can do this.
I love you, lady.
I love you too, son.
Okay, and I'm not going to play the next one, but you can go check this one out online. This is an incredible story as well. This is the Alex Landau story, who was almost killed again when he was just pulled over for a routine traffic violation. His mother is white, and he talks about growing up as a black man who never really understood how much danger he was in until this night of this traffic stop, right? And so he talks about this experience here. So it's a really great one, and I'll definitely point you toward that. I'm just going to talk really quickly about participatory culture. It's actually kind of crucial, but I'm going to let you go to the site itself and go look at the examples. This is called Mapping Memories. This is like one of my favorite projects. I wish I had a little bit more time to talk about it. It's a transmedia project with immigrant youth in Montreal originally, now throughout Canada. And it had documentary facilitators. The projects are very diverse, from audio to video to walking tours, and again to what Helen DiMichele would call media socials. Collaboration as a way for young people to share their stories and to heal. In many of these cases, sometimes it's about preservation of their family and their history, but sometimes it really is a kind of therapy as well. The emphasis is on co-creation in storytelling, and young people, this is another one what's really important to go look at the website. There's incredible resources for educators on the site. Emphasis on co-creation in storytelling, and the young people play an equal role in how and what will be told. This is not like, tell me your story. This is like, what story do you want to tell? The site features video, but a book that talks about the process and the best practices employed, the ethical considerations. There's also educational and youth resources too. I'd really recommend taking a look at this My Two Families video on there. It's a story of a Rwandan refugee who her entire family is killed, and she comes to Montreal, and she's the sole survivor of her family. And she talks about her family, the two families, the one that they've all been killed through the genocide, and then her new family in Montreal, which they have designated her as the mother. So it's kind of interesting, even though people are older than her. It's a great story. Also, I'm just going to skip over this too. This is an example of speculative fiction or alternative reality game. This is a pretty famous one, World Without Oil. It goes back to 2007. It's a hybrid of reality and fiction. It's a future possible world, which seems like it kind of works in with a lot of things that were being talked about today. Here, the example is a serious game, The World Without Oil. It's a groundbreaking game that asks people to imagine what the world would be like without oil. It's very different than just a regular online game. It really asks you to live this experience. So in other words, you have to imagine how this would impact your daily life without it, and you have to act that out. So in other words, you would stop driving, you'd only ride a bike, or you would plant a vegetable garden, or again, a whole range of things as a way to deal with this situation, this speculative situation. You're not in an isolated online world with an avatar. This is you in the everyday world, but you're taking that, what your experience is, and then uploading that to the website. It was an incredibly successful ARG. It was created by Ken Eklund and Jane McGonigal. They had over 60,000 global participants, viewers, and something like 1,500 co-creators. Everything from blog posts to comics to images. Everyone could start to just even email or discussion. So everyone could start where they were to participate in this story. So a very participatory event. Okay, organizing. I have two really great examples I really want to kind of look at just to kind of close out here. So now the objective is, we've been thinking about participation as an entity in and of itself, getting people involved, getting people to speak, to share their voices, to really get engaged in an individual context. And I wanted to look a little bit at the Black Lives Matter movement, because it's one that really disproves Malcolm Gladwell's notion that the revolution will not be tweeted, because it's being tweeted right now. In a recent interview in The Guardian, Alicia Garza, who's one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter, she talks about the shooting death and the death of Trayvon Martin, and also the verdict to George Zimmerman of just being this turning point in her life. And so she wrote this post on Facebook that ended with, "Black people, I love you, I love us, our lives matter." Her friend, then Pratis Colors, then took that remark and began reposting her remarks with the hashtag Black Lives Matter. And every time she reposted it, she put that. It then went viral, right? Well, not only her remarks, but the hashtag. And this really has become the organizing, one of the key organizing elements, not the only, but the key organizing element for a new civil rights movement in the US. It's not a hierarchical group. Again, it's going to disturb Malcolm Gladwell. It's not hierarchical at all. As Alicia Garza notes, if they're looking for a heterosexual preacher as the center of the organization, he's not here. It's a very distributed kind of network Many African American youth are on different social media, and this is just a galvanizing tool through Facebook and Twitter of a way to engage, and not just to vent, but to really even to document police brutality, to organize protest, and to really become a witness to stories that the news media is often ignoring in terms of police brutality. They've organized a series of the Garza and Colors also organized freedom rides to Ferguson, Missouri after the death of Michael Brown. Also, social media clearly serves as an alternative channel for information and community, since mass media pretty much ignores African or distorts African American issues. So what we've seen with the Black Lives Matter is a series of viral videos in conjunction with protest. And emerging out of this is also Bree Newsom, who removed the Confederate flag from the South Carolina State Capitol in June after the Charleston shootings, which was just this extraordinary event. And when she was being carried off by police, escorted off the Capitol by police, her comments was, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" So she's very, there was a biblical passage, right? So she's very much invoking the history, the connection to the civil rights movement with that commentary, and also denying the fear, and also speaking against that fear that the flag, which is really a flag that was not so much about the Confederate Army as much as a flag that came into being during the first civil rights movement and was an organizer for the KKK. That's the real history of the Confederate flag. So she's really saying no to the fear that that flag represents as well. So it's a real act of defiance. And it's no accident that Bree Newsom is also a filmmaker, and this was really an act of performance art, and not just somebody who just thought they'd go climb up the pole and take down the flag, right? Her action went viral, and very shortly thereafter, the flag came down, which was, I grew up in South Carolina, I was stunned. It was great. But it was a shock that just, and again, it was the social pressure from both social media and her act, which just galvanized people as well. So lastly, I want to talk about this other example of transmedia organizing, which is Sasha Chalk's phrase. He argues it's the key emergent, so organizing in and of itself, transmedia as an organizing tool is the key emergent social media practice that's going on right now. And we see this both with the immigrant movement and the Black Lives Matter movement seems to reinforce that. He traces the use of cross-platform organizing and immigrant rights movement, starting with the national mass demonstrations, school and work boycotts in May 2006, and the Day Without an Immigrant protest. This event began in protest to a bill that was being proposed, the anti-immigration bill, and the huge, massive protests that in effect shut down the bill. Not only a range of media strategies from print to social media, but the phrase is again meant to flip that hierarchy from the one to the many. It's not transmedia broadcast, but it's transmedia as the soul of organizing. It's the heart of organizing. You use what people, how they speak to each other. You use whatever you have. If you have only print, that's what you'll use. If you have that combination of print and radio, that gets been streamed online. This group, Sasha worked with a group, Volsmob. It was very important and still going on right now. Their work is incredible. It has a whole range of stories by immigrant workers who simply call in. You don't have to have a smartphone. You don't need SoundCloud. You call in this number on any kind of phone. It records your stories. You can also put photos with it as well. It's an incredible tool. There's both Vozmob, you should check that out, and there's also Vojo, which is a phone tool that is what they're using. That's the kind of the underpinning behind it. And just take a look at that and see kind of what an extraordinary thing that is. But it really, the key for Costanza Chalk is not only this kind of flipping it around, using any strategy by any media necessary, it is that media, his other point is he really believes in the power of making media. Media making connects us, right? Media making helps us understand what the issues are in terms of communication, in terms of our own identity. So it serves to build identity, to build investment in the organizing and in the community itself. It also builds key media literacy skills to read and to respond to mainstream media. So I'm just going to see if this will, who knows if this will be in sync or not. But this is an example from Vozma that talks a little bit about the project, and I'll kind of end with that. Hopefully it's in sync.
En Voces Móviles buscamos amplificar nuestras voces, convirtiendo los teléfonos celulares en una herramienta para la comunicación popular.
Trabajadores, jornaleros, investigadores, estudiantes, organizadores, programadores, formamos parte de crear un sistema de software libre,
donde mandamos mensajes de texto, audio, video y mostramos nuestro mundo, leyendo nuestra realidad para contar nuestras historias.
My name is Natalie Ariano.
My name is Diana Rodriguez.
Mi nombre es Rafael Velázquez.
Manuel Mancilla.
Madelu González.
Hi, my name is Marco Rodriguez. Science will never be an option. That's why I like mobile voices, because I can speak to the world.
Nuestra voz viaja a través. Okay, so half my videos are in sync, so sorry about that. But I think the key thing here, and this is some of the ones where it's just like an image and voiceover, that's a really great example. It's something they pulled from Vozma, like things that people uploaded themselves, or the things that you can find on Vojo as well. So this is one of the projects that Sasha is really just a great example of an activist scholar. He's been very involved. He's not just documenting what local organizations are doing, he's giving them the tools and helping with literacy training to help them tell their own stories. Vozmob's mission statement is a platform for immigrant and low-wage workers in Los Angeles to create stories about their lives in communities directly from cell phones. It appropriates technology to create power in our communities and achieve greater participation in the digital public sphere. So it's not a tool for it's not providing voice to the voiceless, right? It's letting people have the tools so that they can speak for themselves. So with that in mind, so let's think just for 1 second, it's going to conclude right here. How do we get to transformation from here? And I think it's true, I really agree with Sasha here, and Sasha is my former office mate at USC also. We're both teaching at the Institute for Multimedia Literacy, which is now Media Arts and Practice. How do we get to transformation? And I think I want to come down on this side of critical making, media literacy as being key to this. I'm not coming down on the side of any one strategy, archive or tool or platform or starting, but what I am coming down on the side of is rather with grassroots participation and this act of spreading, sharing, making. That's where the transformative component is in digital media. And as I've written about with my colleague Virginia Kuhn, when you have critical making, you have what I call the drift to praxis. Meaning, once you start making, there's no turning back. You aren't consuming, right? You're not consuming media, you're engaged, you're thinking, you're imagining what does this image say to me, or where does this image go, or why is this image there, or why does this image oppress me, or how can I disrupt that? So I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but I would say start making. And this is a great website also. Witness is a human rights organization that for years has been documenting various human rights abuses through people on the ground, individuals. And so they have a whole guide of resources, curriculum training, etc., on how to use media tools. So there also I would go back, point you back, so witness, I would point you back also to making, mapping memories. There's the Center for Digital Storytelling, and also think about participating when these ARGs do come involved, like World Without Oil, jump in and take the opportunity to participate in that or create one yourself. There's actually going on one right now if you want to talk to me about it, because I know I'm out of time. There's this one called right now Sherlock Holmes and the Internet of Things. And it's just started. They're using Sherlock Holmes as a story everybody knows, but it really is about the ethos of collaboration and distributed authorship and the world of the Internet of Things, smart object, the connectedness of objects, and the connectedness of objects to our daily lives as well. Lance Weiler, he still is a filmmaker, but he's really transformed into someone who is very focused on this ethos of make something, learn something, make something, share it. There's great, he offers great learn to share workshops globally, and also DIY days throughout the US. The DIY days are mainly in the US, but the learn to share days are pretty much global. So thank you. Thanks for putting up with the video.
Vicki, that was great. Run through all of that.
Yeah.
Any questions or comments? I know we're kind of short.
Yeah, just one quick comment. I'm a bit suspicious. Some of the things that you showed, I wouldn't categorize them as activism. I mean, this presentation was meant to speak about, media techniques for activism, but some of it you showed, I'm not sure, but it looked sometimes they were confirming a kind of narrative that is somehow, supporting maybe like a political party like Democrats, for instance, or like there's a thing with Obama, for instance, where
which one?
The audio, what is it? The storycorps.org. I mean, it's a bit tricky, and some of the other things I felt like maybe we should look into how they are funded also, who is actually behind it, and what's the purpose of. I mean, it's all good, these media strategies, but we have to be a little bit more critical of what it is.
Yeah, well, I think StoryCorps, it's an NGO that's been around for like a long time, and it gets funding from go out there and get government grants. It's a nonprofit, basically. The one I'm the most suspicious of is participant media, right? Even though Cartoon Chem, that material looks quite polished, that's still a nonprofit as well. I don't really think those are so much, those are more advocacy still, right? And that's the kind of turning point really for me is Helen DeMichel's work, Lunch Love Community, where she just completely flips this from advocacy to she's very much on the ground with activists that worked on the Berkeley Lunch Campaign. And they had funding for all those amazing, we didn't show the clip because we kind of ran out of time. But they had all this amazing stuff where kids are like growing their food in the school. And this is completely grassroots. And then the local government cut all the funding to it. And the people just rose up in arms and got the funding. So that's very, very grassroots. The mapping memories is also very much low-end NGO. They work with, I forgot who, just a whole range of different social services as part of their, do that. So, and I didn't spend as much time on that one, but I do think that's another important one as well. I think Nani's work, De La Pena, that's still very much in the kind of, she's a journalist, right? So she's still, as she's noticing, she gets a lot of pushback, whether that's real news, but she's still working into the kind of future of journalism, top down. It's like still almost it's immersive, but it's still kind of advocacy, right? And her whole funding is very much, how I'd say, hit and miss, right through, sometimes she worked with Oculus Rift for a while. So just, so those are the kinds of, hit and miss, like get a little funding here, make something, get a little funding there. StoryCorps, that's not, And also, Atomic Mom, that was just that's a woman who works at Pixar who wanted to make a film about her mother, right? And it turned into this, and she's very involved. She actually created, as a result of this, a whole database just on peace organizations that she's opening up to other filmmakers to utilize. So for like, or for not just other filmmakers, but for other social groups as well to use on activist events, right? So there's there's more kind of drilling down that we'd have to do in each one of these cases. But I think it's a great question. I'm the most skeptical of participants. You know, just that whole kind of gloss and the celebrity. And that's a kind of a big genre too, as well.
Any other questions or comments?
I think just to follow it, it's like whatever the tools are, it's, you know, the values and how they're used and by whom and enabling of them and, you know, how to not be, again, disabled by access to
I think one of the key things also, which is an important element of activism for me, is how much people are actually being heard and engaged, right? So it's not necessarily that outcome of, mainly because things move so slow in politics, but something like Black Lives Matter, right? That's just not going to go away, even though a good segment of the country would love for it to go away. But it's building and growing. They're taking on the political establishment. I know we're talking about interrupting. They're interrupting politicians as they give their talks. So I think it's very much about this people's investment and voice and participation that's really key to me, and that's the outcome. Right? I think that's really key to the outcome because it's so much, in the US, it's so easy to be passive. It's so easy to say it doesn't matter. It's so easy to let the media machine just wash over us and tell us what to do and where to go and, you know, what to buy, how to feel. And these are, I think, things that are very disruptive. So even something like StoryCorps, this is an individual story that, again, someone's just saying, that life is important, which in the kind of general scope of corporate capitalism, our lives are not important. You know, we're just to go purchase things. So I think that's, to me, the kind of political component is this participation. And Sasha's point is that's where the organizing comes. That's where the opportunity for political change happens, and we're just seeing that now. I mean, the immigrant movement is just really growing, and you can see from the pushback that we're getting in the presidential election on this, how effective both Black Lives Matter and the immigrant protest movements have been. Yeah.
I mean, I think also my disturbance stems from the idea of, you know, because you introduce a concept of interactivity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not so sure if you're aware of the media theory by Jan Mulder, where he actually says a lot of interactive media are actually not really interactive. They're actually more responsive.
Yeah.
You click and you get a response. But interactivity suggests that there is a change on both sides, on both parties. Okay. So, and then I wonder, why did you leave out, for instance, something like Activism, where people really learn how to program tools, but they just don't get the tools to make them work, but they get also the control of how to make the tools.
Right. Well, that's the kind of the two examples at the end, which is both Sasha's work, Rosenab, and also and Witness. Witness is very important for that, and the Lance Weiler stuff.
So would you
I think
that
Lance
these
is
are hacktivists?
Lance is definitely a hacktivist. Sasha is a hacktivist. In fact, let me just go back here. If you go to Vozmab and Vojo, that's all open source material.
Yeah,
so So you can go take a look at like how they built that communication system. Yeah.
I think we're moving on to the final part of the day. So a big thank you to Vicki. Thank you.